how do you know when a nation should go to war and when a nation shouldn't go to war? See, right now we have wars. We have wars going on all across the world. Every day we hear about war in Israel and war in Ukraine as well as other places. And as Christians, you can struggle to wonder, like, well, how do we know whether this is a just war or an unjust war? And I want to look at their ancient war, and I want to compare it to some of our modern wars. Let me just do this as a verbal process. So where they're at is the nation of Israel. The people who invaded them were the Canaanites, as well as other surrounding nations. Their descendants today are called the Palestinians. They came from a place that today is called the Gaza Strip. They broke down the border, they invaded the nation, they terrorized the people, they attacked civilians, women and children, so then the army fought back to displace them and send them back to their homeland to secure their border. What's happening in Judges 4 is exactly what's happening today in Israel and the war in Israel. Same descendants, Jewish people, and the Palestinians are descendants of the Canaanites. Same place, Israel and Gaza Strip. Same thing, border fails, invaders come in. Same consequence, women and children are killed and taken captive and hostage. So I want to use this ancient case study as a modern example of what some would call just war. So I want to look real quickly at what's called just war theory. Number one, is it a legitimate authority? Mobs, terrorists, anarchists are not legitimate authorities. In that day, when the nation was invaded, it was invaded by illegitimate authorities. There was a nation, and then a nation next door had a terrorist invasion. That is illegitimate use of force, which means that the response would be a legitimate use of force. Number two, it's defensive, not offensive. In their case, they were living in their land and their enemies invaded. Today, in the modern nation of Israel, they were living in their land and then neighbors invaded. And so now pushing back is defensive. It is not offensive. In addition, number three, is it for a noble cause? If human life is going to be sacrificed, it must be for a cause that is worthwhile. In their day, women and children had been terrorized and tormented and traumatized for 20 years. You're going to hear this when we get into chapter 5. It says that they kept taking the young and old women hostage and then abusing and traumatizing them for 20 years. Similarly, in our day, when Israel was invaded, they took hostages, those who were civilians, and they're still holding many, and it's just horrendous to think what they're doing, even right now, to women young and old. And so fighting back is in fact a noble cause. Number four, proportional force. The response must be commensurate to the attacks. In the days of the ancient nation of Israel, they were invaded by an army that had 900 iron chariots. We read that previously. Those are like tanks. And those who were fighting them did not have iron chariots. So actually, the Jewish people, the Israelis, they were not responding with commensurate force. They were actually underserved in their military capability. But today in Israel, if you are attacked by one group and then you attack with soldiers, that is proportional use of force. In addition, does the mission target soldiers, not civilians? In the ancient war in Israel, the soldiers invaded and they targeted the civilians. They overtook the streets, the people couldn't come and go, and they destroyed the economy. They also killed their crops. They were attacking civilians. And so similarly, in our day, when Israel was invaded, it was trained soldiers and terrorists attacking women, children, and those who were elderly, those who were in fact civilians. And so the response of soldiers fighting soldiers, that is a just war. In addition, more lives must be preserved than taken. If you're going to sacrifice some lives, it must be to save more lives. And so in the days of the ancient war in Israel, it had been 20 years of killing and crippling people in the economy. And so the soldiers are fighting back to prevent the further loss of life. In our day as well, I would argue for the nation of Israel in their current war, if they do not eradicate the terrorist invaders, that ultimately their nation will be destroyed. I'll get into this when we get into a further study of Gideon next. And I'm going to read to you the actual charter of Hamas and why this is a demonic spiritual warfare to eradicate Jewish people from the planet. But the entire current invading force that attacked Israel, their charter is that there should be no Jewish state and no Jewish people. Their goal is genocide. So unless you stop them, you're going to eradicate human life for an entire people group. Therefore, it meets the just cause of more lives being preserved than taken. And lastly, is it a last resort? Is it a last resort? And this is where in the ancient world, it was a last resort. They were invaded and oppressed for 20 years. Time to fight back. In our own day, it is a last resort because if you allow a nation to be attacked, then every nation will attack it. And what makes the current war in Israel so difficult is trained soldiers invaded a nation, attacked women, children, and civilians, and then retreated back to their nation, and now they are hiding behind innocent civilians. And sometimes, might I add, not innocent civilians, those who are harboring terrorism. And so this current war is where those who have no heed for human life are sacrificing human life in an effort to get international outcry and a call for justice so that they can continue their jihad and eradicate the nation of Israel and the Hebrew people from the earth. And we know that all of this is demonic because when Jesus returns, he returns to Jerusalem. And they want to eradicate Jerusalem so that there is no place for the Lord Jesus to return and to begin his kingdom. That being said, what we're seeing here is a just war. And it is the opposite of something called pacifism. Pacifism is this belief that you should never respond with force. There are whole denominations and traditions within Christianity that are pacifist. They will not respond. They won't join the military. They won't do combat. They can't be police officers or first responders. Let me say this. The God of the Bible is for sure not a pacifist. He is not a pacifist. He attacks and he destroys entire nations like Sodom and Gomorrah in Egypt. And here he is allowing his people to defend themselves. Furthermore, not only does he command them to war, he joins them in that war. So I just want to say this, because in this house, we say thank you to soldiers, we thank you to veterans, we say thank you to current military personnel, we say thank you to police officers and firefighters, and we say thank you to first responders. Because what you're doing is you're getting in the way between evil and people. And that's a good and godly thing to do. We are not the defund the police people. We are defund the politicians people, but we are not the defund the police people. And so ultimately too, I was thinking about this. Some years ago, I was talking to a gentleman. He was a complete pacifist theologian, wears a turtleneck, drinks herbal tea, in touch with his feelings, wearing Crocs kind of guy. And so we were talking, and I was like, okay, so you're a pacifist, so you don't believe that there should be any response to violence or aggression? He said, no. I said, well, okay, hypothetically, a bad guy breaks into your house, right? And he is going to assault your wife and harm your kids, and he's armed. I said, what do you do? He said, and I quote, pray. I was like, that's great. I'd pray for that guy to go to hell. And then I would act. At the end of the day, you can't be, especially a man with any dignity, value, or valor, if you can watch women and children get harmed and not get in the middle. You are not a man. There's something broken in your soul. And we don't want to be the guys that start the fight, but if need be, we want to be the guys that end the fight. And that's what's going to happen here.
Howdy, Pastor Mark here. Thanks for viewing the clip. And if you'd like the entire sermon, we've got it ready to go.